This is Chan Chan, which is the capital of the Chimu people. The entire site was constructed in the 9th century, and we actually think this was the largest city of the New World. And I did use the word city, not just the largest city in South America, but of the entire New World. Our textbook author estimates that there were 40,000 people here, but other sources say 60,000, so somewhere in that range. It was an incredibly large settlement that did require, and as you look at my slides, you can see how dry it is, that did require state control to put into place a very complex and well-functioning irrigation system, canals to provide water to people. The empire that was created, and this was made with a conquest state, is referred to as the Empire of Chimu. It's located, its heartland basically, is in the region of the old Moche holdings in Moche Valley near the present-day city of Trujillo. One of the things that's kind of cool about the Chimu folks is that they are historic people. They were conquered by the Inca in 1470, and we have a decent record that helps to document this. But because they're late in time, and because we have chronicles that document the Inca Empire, we also have information about the Chimu. And what that means is we actually think we know the dynasties, the different names of the rulers, not all of them, but enough of them so that we have a good sense of the dynastic lineage of the Chimu folks. We're talking about elite rulers. This is from the late intermediate period, and that follows the middle horizon when we had a broader expanse of rule with Wari, with Tiwanaku, for example. This is a period when we encounter more fragmentation and regional styles again. And this is the last one, so this is the late intermediate period. In this time period, the Chimu, nevertheless, are pretty impressive. They don't have an empire particularly, but they have a pretty hefty chunk of territory, and that's going to include 800 miles of coastal land. And that 800 miles of coastal land, of course, did have to be carefully controlled, and particularly it had to be provided with water. This also covers a total area of 8 square miles, so it is a pretty hefty chunk of real estate in terms of the settled area of Chan Chan itself. Today, it is basically an archaeological site, but also it is in something of a ruined condition because it was made out of adobe brick. Essentially, we'll see in a second, poured adobe to create the walls. But we have enough of it to really understand the layout. We do believe that there were 10 separate compounds. Each of these was heavily walled. You can see in my slide over here on the upper left, one of them, and the one that I have that I just outlined is represented with the diagram in our lower right. But in the distance, you can see another one of those as well. They vary in size. Sometimes they vary a little in shape. They always remain rectilinear in outline, however. These 10 compounds, we believe, were each made for a single ruler of Chimu. The compound would be closed at the death of the ruler. And what this represents is a term split inheritance. It means that the new king, the heir to the throne, would come to the throne, and guess what he would get? He would get the right to be ruler. He would not get any of the family inheritance. The family inheritance would go to the rest of the family. It would keep them happy. It would keep them from contesting the right of the heir to rule. And basically, it would satisfy all of their needs. And they could live off the wealth of the deceased ruler and be content in their situation. The new king, the heir to the throne who assumes the rulership, he would be forced to go out and conquer new territory. using this system, he would get tribute from the new folks that he conquered. He could amass his own wealth, and with that, he could build his own compound. So he'd be working on the compound construction and the acquisition of wealth, which would be stored inside of it until the time of his own death, and at that point, essentially, the compound would be closed. This is a system that is going to be picked up and used by the Inca. It is a system that does force conquest. It means that your empire, your territory, for the Inca, it was an empire. Your empire, your territory is going to continue to grow. And guess what? Chan reflects that because it does look like the site grows, and I've got it in quotes here, grows over time. It's not laid out with an original plan of where these compounds are going to go, although they do all maintain a rectangular shape in one form or another. These compounds also, if you go to the lower left of my slide, I have some points for us. Each of these compounds had hugely massive walls. We're talking about thick walls, but also walls that once upon a time it's estimated went up to 34 feet. We're talking about pretty imposing structures. They did have open courtyards, but these would have, as well as the rest of the compound, been accessed in a single entranceway. If you go down here to the reconstruction, the computer generated image, you can see that we go in this way, and as soon as we would get inside, and it does look like we're offset, the entranceway is a little offset. That's one of the features of the place. It's like a maze, it's like a labyrinth, and it is intended to confuse. This would be a large open courtyard. So single entrance, large courtyard, very massive walls. In addition to that, there is a second plaza or courtyard located inside that is next to what we're calling audience halls. Now, we don't know exactly how these were used, but we do think that these were places probably where the king could perform rituals as well as meet with individuals, and therefore these would serve more or less as an audience hall. You can think Oval Office if you would like to think of it that way, but someplace where the king could meet with other important individuals. One of the other features of these compounds is that they all have walk-in wells. I'd like you to see this area right here, which represents water. And I'd like you to remember how dry this region is. When you control water, it is a representation of your wealth, and it gives you a sense of control and of status. So we do have water reserves in each of the compounds. There is also a storage area. It's located over here, and we do believe that the Chimu kings throughout their lifetime did store, some people say hoard, wealth that they acquired as tribute over the lifetime of their kingship, so that when they died, this could serve them essentially in the next world, but it also could help to sustain the estate, the next generation, essentially family members who would be tied to this compound. We also then have to have one last thing, and that's located right here, and it is the mausoleum. That's where the dead king is going to be buried. Each of these compounds, as soon as the king died, would have been closed. It would have, however, been available to the family to perform rituals for the deceased individual, and also it would have maintained the family as a source of material wealth. Each of these compounds is just amazing in terms of its maze-like passageways. Some people do describe this as a labyrinth because it's so confusing. This is intended, and this would be one of them right here that you can see pretty easily. This is intended to control access. It's also intended to intimidate because you're going to get inside and you're not sure where you're going. It's meant to awe, and probably more than anything else to enhance the status of the individual king Because what these passageways, along with the walls and the single access, would accomplish is to exclude and to separate outsiders from the interior space that belonged to the royals, and particularly to the king. So all of this would serve to awe. And there would have been guards along the way, there would have been administrators along the way, so you'd have had to also pass through a series of checkpoints as you got closer and closer to talking to the important members of the court. This is a slide that'll show you a little bit of the tightness of these passageways. This to me looks like a tour group that is coming through. These walled compounds would have been disorienting, and the passageways themselves would have been reasonably small. You couldn't bring in an army. It wasn't going to get through very successfully. One of the features is the open work diamond pattern that we're looking at right here and that we're seeing down here. It's been suggested, and this certainly is a successful decoration. It's created in Adobe. It's also been suggested it would increase airflow. It can get hot on the North Coast. Other people have suggested that this is a reference to the pattern of crafted out of material, out of fabric, fish nets that would have been used for capturing fish from the ocean. The Chimu were farmers. They were also fishermen. In other words, this might in fact be a reference to the wealth of the king, gaining wealth from the sea, gaining wealth from tribute. Each one of these enclosures also is going to have a water reserve or a walk-in well. Essentially, this is a similar tradition, but not quite this much water and not this open on the south coast as well. This is one of the water reserves. If you visit Chan Chan today, it may look like this, and I'm showing it to you because, folks, this is lush, and this is a lot of visible water to have in a desert region. The walls of the compounds were created by literally pouring mud into forms. This would be, for those of you who've watched anybody pour concrete, it would work pretty much the same way. But instead of using concrete, we're using a kind of liquefied mud that will harden to become adobe walls or bricks. What this does is to give a very continuous and uninterrupted surface where the artist could engage in decorations with friezes. And I have the word in capitals. A frieze is a continuous band of decoration. In our case here, it is relief decoration. And it is used extensively in the Chimu compounds. These do resemble textile designs, and in particular in the rectangular or rectilinear forms and the use of geometric patterns, and in the repetition. Think of the hem designs that you might find on a textile, for example. Those occur here on the walls, and in particular along the bottom of the wall. You might think of the way in which the hem decoration on a mantle could be displayed. This repetition also stresses the flatness of the walls themselves. The reliefs are located near the courtyards and the audience halls. They aren't everywhere, so they're intended, I think, to be viewed particularly by people who are visiting. And these images may be associated with abundance and wealth and the control of the king over these sources of abundance and wealth. In our textbook, our author talks about the fishies swimming in the canal, and I'd like you to see my fishies over here. This is part of my favorite example from Chimu, so let's take a closer look. The Chimu artists actually are successful in conveying the idea of movement and of flow of those fishies as you look down the wall of one of the compounds. Here's a closer look at my fishies. Pretty cool fish, actually. They maintain their geometric, almost cookie cutter kind of shapes as they flip from being across the horizon to a vertical position. But they successfully convey the sense of movement through water, and I think that's what our artist was aiming for. I would like you to know that this follows the shape of a mountain. and that the mountains are the source of the water for the coast. So I think there is a nod here. The step design certainly references the mountains. So I think that there is a nod to the source of the water and the fishies as symbols of abundance that is produced by it.